Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most sobering geopolitical realities of the 21st century. We are drawing deeply from the meticulous research laid out in the book Dragon on Our Doorstep, Managing China Through Military Power by Ghazala Wahab and Pravin Sawhney. We're going to unpack the multidimensional military challenge that is quite literally pressing against India's borders right now. This is a rigorous look at national security, survival, and the absolutely critical structural reforms the authors argue are needed when a rising superpower shares your immediate frontier. Let's get into it. So, what if your greatest strategic challenge isn't across an ocean, but standing right on your frontier? The authors present a chilling premise here. Treating China as just some distant economic rival or a purely diplomatic puzzle is a massive strategic vulnerability. According to their analysis, the real threat to India's future is a live, multi-domain military force pressing directly against its sovereign borders. Proximity changes everything. It forces a complete rethink of how a nation builds and sustains deterrence. Because when a major adversary with vastly superior resources is on your doorstep, your margin for error effectively drops to zero. Our strategic briefing docket today covers The Dragon is Here, Coordinated Grand Strategy, the two-front squeeze, India's internal fault lines, and finally, the imperative for reform. Section 1. The Dragon is Here. You know, the modern tensions along the Himalayan frontier are not just random, accidental flare-ups. Wahab and Sawhney trace these fault lines through a very precise historical lens. Sure, ancient civilizational links between India and China absolutely exist, but the modern strategic relationship was deeply and irrevocably scarred by the 1962 Sino-Indian War. That conflict didn't just draw heavily militarized lines on a map, it cemented a profound strategic mistrust. But here is the really interesting part. The authors highlight the year 2008 as the critical inflection point for the current era. Right in the middle of a global financial crisis, a highly confident China recognized its own rising power and completely shifted its posture. They became significantly more demanding, unapologetic, and militarily assertive on the frontier. Understanding this history is absolutely crucial for grasping today's threat perceptions. Section 2. Coordinated Grand Strategy. To really understand the scale of this challenge, we have to look at the stark contrast and how both states organize their power. The authors detail how China operates with a highly coordinated grand strategy. The Chinese state actively weaponizes its national coherence. They make sure that their massive economic growth, cutting-edge tech, and long-term military modernization are all pulling in the exact same direction. By contrast, India's current strategic posture is assessed as fragmented. The authors argue that India often relies on external alliances or diplomatic maneuvering just to compensate for a lack of cohesive internal grand strategy. In the ruthless world of geopolitics, this lack of alignment heavily dilutes India's national power and practically hands the strategic initiative straight to Beijing. And we need to be clear about something else. Modern state power is entirely multi-domain. If you treat the China challenge as just a singular, land-based border dispute up in the Himalayas, you are severely underestimating the threat. China's military modernization spans multiple interconnected theaters. A land skirmish today? Well, that could be instantly backed by advanced cyber warfare targeting critical civilian power grids, or anti-satellite weaponry designed to blind communications in outer space. At the very same time, China is aggressively expanding its naval power to secure vital sea lanes. A conflict with China wouldn't just be fought on land. It would be fought at sea, in the digital ether, and in orbit, all at the exact same time. Section 3. The two-front squeeze. Now, the geopolitical reality becomes even more complex when we factor in regional alliances. The authors make a crucial point here. Pakistan must not be viewed merely as a hostile neighbor. No, it is China's trusted, deeply integrated military partner. This creates what is known as strategic depth through partnership. India doesn't just face two separate, isolated border problems. Instead, Chinese capabilities and Pakistani geographical pressure overlap perfectly. Because of this synchronization, the two nations can easily coordinate their military posturing, share defense tech, and force India to constantly divide its troops, logistics, and attention across a massive, exhausting two-front defensive burden. Within this two-front dynamic, there is a highly sobering analysis of Kashmir. The authors argue that the Kashmir dispute is so much more than a localized bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. In the broader strategic architecture, instability in Kashmir acts as an active bleeding pressure point. By heavily draining India's military resources, tying down vast numbers of troops in counterinsurgency operations, and consuming precious political bandwidth, this localized conflict actually serves China's overarching geostrategic goals perfectly. It ensures that India remains permanently bogged down internally, which severely limits its ability to project power outward or challenge Chinese hegemony in the broader Asian region. This whole dynamic brings us to a defining rule of the region. Geography is destiny, unless strategy compensates for it. The authors devote significant attention to the brutal reality of the Himalayan theater. The extreme altitudes, sub-zero temperatures, and massive logistical distances of the Tibetan plateau impose severe kinetic constraints on any military force. Maintaining supply chains or deploying heavy armor in this kind of terrain is an absolute logistical nightmare. You can't assume tactical parity just by drawing lines on a map. Any successful deterrence strategy has to be meticulously built around surviving and actually operating within these unforgiving physical realities. Section 4. India's internal fault lines. Building on that idea of drained resources, Wahab and Sawhney make a compelling case that national security is inherently holistic. Think about it. A nation simply cannot project power or maintain robust external deterrence if its state machinery is fractured from within. Domestic instability, prolonged insurgencies, and internal political fractures are directly detrimental to border security. These internal weaknesses act like a siphon. They pull away critical intelligence assets, elite military units, and crucial political focus that should be locked on to external adversaries. The central thesis is undeniable. Strategic resilience abroad absolutely demands an ironclad internal order and cohesive state capacity at home. A fractured state machinery cannot stare down a highly unified superpower. Section 5. The imperative for reform. So, diagnosing the vulnerability is only half the battle. Now, we turn to the urgent prescriptions India must adopt to reclaim its strategic agency. First, statecraft has to acknowledge that diplomacy, when it's totally devoid of credible hard military backing, is largely ineffective against a state like China. Second, the authors warn against the dangerous temptation of over-relying on the United States or the Quad to act as some sort of geopolitical shield. Distant allies have their own shifting priorities. You can't depend on them forever. Therefore, the third and most vital step is this. India must indigenously build genuine, independent, multi-domain military power. The ultimate lesson here is that national security cannot and will not be outsourced. To achieve this kind of independent deterrence, we need an end to empty rhetoric and a pivot towards sweeping, concrete, systemic reforms. It's not enough to simply throw more money at the defense budget. Building a truly modern military machine requires profound doctrinal reform. It requires streamlining bloated bureaucratic structures so decision-making is vastly faster. Crucially, the authors emphasize the absolute necessity of service integration, often called jointness. The Indian Army, Navy, and Air Force can no longer operate in isolated silos. They have to be integrated into unified theater commands. Only through aggressive technological modernization and highly realistic planning for future conflicts can the military establishment actually meet the scale of this challenge. Finally, as we look to the geopolitical horizon, the authors remind us that true modern power extends far beyond the snowy peaks of the Himalayas. China's naval reach is rapidly expanding into the Indian Ocean region. They're securing vital sea lines of communication and intensifying maritime competition. India simply cannot afford to suffer from continental tunnel vision. Vigilant readiness and naval power projection on the high seas are just as critical to maintaining the overall strategic balance as guarding those northern land borders. I want to leave you with a final urgent question derived from the core of Wahab and Sawhney's analysis. The dragon is permanently stationed on the doorstep. Its multi-domain capabilities are undeniable, and its regional power is expanding by the day. But will the political and military establishment possess the immense will required to enact these deep structural reforms before time simply runs out? It is a question of profound consequence, not just for the nation, but for the stability of the entire region. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we'll see you next time.